Hello, welcome back to the Spectrasonics Omnisphere tutorial. Today we're having a look at envelopes, and there's actually enough in this subject that I'm going to split it into two. So this is envelopes part one, easy mode. So we've got three different types of envelopes that Omnisphere has. We have an amplifier or amplitude envelope, depending on your perspective, which is all about volume, a filter envelope, completely dedicated to the filter, and then we've got some modulation envelopes as well. And a really important distinction to draw right at the outset is that amp and filter are per layer. So here we are on layer A. I turn them all up to max and go to layer B and turn all of these down to minimum. Then they're disconnected. That's true for the amp and filter envelopes, but the modulation envelopes are shared across the entire patch. So here I am on layer A, and we'll deal with all of this in great detail, but just for now, turn all of them up to max. All four layers share the same modulation envelopes, okay? So let's head over back to the amp envelope and have a bit more of a look at what's going on here. So this is called a four-stage envelope: attack, decay, sustain, and release. And this is really common. You'll see this in pretty much every synthesizer. The attack specifies how long it takes once we hit the key for it to reach full volume. So at minimum, we hear the sound immediately. If I turn the amp up, can you see it's now set to 3.16 seconds? I'll hit a key. It fades in. Over the course of 3.16 seconds, after that amount of time, it's reached its maximum volume. Decay is what happens after it reaches its maximum volume. So the attack gets you the first part of the way there, and decay tells you what happens after it reaches this maximum volume point. So if we take 5 seconds to get to the loudest point, and another 5 seconds of decay time, I'm going to just turn this all the way down for the moment, then you're going to hear basically a triangle kind of thing, and you'll see it in the various graphs we've got as well. Louder and louder and louder. Eventually, after 5 seconds, it starts getting quieter, and then takes another 5 seconds to decay down to 0. Why did it go down to 0? It went down to 0 because our sustain value is currently set to 0. And this is the odd one out. Of the ADSR family, attack, decay, and release are all time-based. Every time we move one of these things, you see the change in seconds, whereas sustain isn't. You just get this value from 0 to 1. So this is an amount value. It's not a time-based value. It means after this has happened, how loud you want me to be. And at 0, I'll just make these a bit faster. We'll get no volume after the attack, then the decay down to 0. If I turn the sustain all the way up to maximum, all the way up to attack, the decay actually holds there now. There is still a decay phase happening in the background, but it's decaying down to a maximum volume, and so it's got nothing to do. Put the sustain somewhere in the middle, all the way up to maximum, down a little bit, and then we stick on the sustain level. Finally, release is what happens after you let the key go. Everything that we've done up until now has had 0 release. As soon as I let the key go, the sound disappears. If I give us 2.5 seconds of release, now when I let the key go, it's going to fade away gently. And I'm going to let the key go, and then it fades away gently. That's got nothing to do with the decay phase. Don't get confused. As soon as you let the key go, attack and decay are done. They are out of the picture. It's all about release. So ADSR, really, really simple stuff. Hopefully you've seen that in any number of synths. It's really, really common. Now, before we crank the difficulty level up a little bit, I want to talk briefly about the filter envelope, because the filter envelope and amplifier envelope share almost all the same traits. So if I get us back to a really simple amplitude shape, that's as simple as your amplitude shape gets. No attack, no decay, immediately up to maximum volume as soon as I press the key. stay there for as long as I press the key. As soon as I let go, get back down to 0 again. That is as simple as an envelope shape gets. On, off. So I've taken the amp envelope out of the equation, and now let's talk about the filter. So we've already dealt with the filter bank in the previous video, but I deliberately avoided talking about the envelope because it introduces that additional difficulty, that complexity of not only you're trying to hear the change that the filter's having on the sound, but the envelope imposes a time-based variance on that filter. So over the course of a period of time specified by this knob here, the envelope knob, different things are going to happen. And that can make it really quite tricky to figure out what the filter's doing rather than what the envelope's doing. But the relationship between these two things is absolutely intrinsic and a really important part of sound design. So hooking these two things up together is a big deal. Now, at the moment, I'm just going to keep it really, really simple. What I'm going to do is I'm going to give us a nice big healthy attack. No decay whatsoever, so just basically got a ramp. And then I'll leave sustain at maximum and turn release all the way down. Now, bear in mind, this is really important. You've got a release slider on the filter envelope here, but if the amp envelope isn't giving you any room to breathe with your sound, if it's cutting the sound off dead as soon as the key is let go, it doesn't matter a jot what the filter envelope says on the release. It's dependent on having some volume to play with in order to make a change to the tone. If there's no sound, there can be no tone. So just bear in mind that this release value is subservient to the amp envelope. And now I'm going to press a key. And so over the period of time specified by the attack slider, 10 seconds, the sound got brighter and brighter and brighter as basically the filter cutoff knob was virtually kind of behind the scenes moved. That's what the envelope is doing, is applying a modulation amount to the filter cutoff. Let's see another example. Now we'll have an attack phase and a decay phase, and then I'll bring the sustain right back down. So it's going to start off muddy, get brighter, then get muddier, and then hold there until I let the key go. There's at its maximum brightness. And there we enter the decay phase, and now we hold at that cutoff level, this cutoff level right here, because there's no modulation being applied by the filter, and then I let go and the keys and the sound stops. So amp envelope and filter envelope in simple mode, which is what we're doing at the moment. Really, really straightforward stuff. And having talked very briefly about the filter, I'm going to shut it off again for the time being, because it's much easier to talk about envelopes in the context of volume. It's just so easy for us to hear what's going on. Next, let's have a look at this velo knob velocity. And this introduces velocity sensitivity into the keys. And by default, it's actually set to 50%. If I control click, it sets it to 50%, which means if I hit a key very quietly, we get a softer, a quieter sound than if I hit the key loud. It's quite subtle. If I increase this all the way to the maximum, it's not subtle anymore. Hit a really quiet key. You can see it on the spectrogram, but you can't actually hear it. There we go. And then hit it loud. And similarly, all the way down at the bottom, there's going to be no velocity sensitivity whatsoever. And this emulates like old analog synths that didn't have velocity sensitivity. So as quiet as I can press, doesn't matter a blind bit. Now I'll hit the key hard, exactly the same volume. Control, click, get our velocity back. When we click the envelope zoom button, we see a whole new world. And the first thing that you can see is that we've got 4 independent buttons for the modulation envelopes. We're going to deal with all of that in the next video. For now, we're concentrating on the amp envelope. And where is it? I would expect to see something here that looks, like an amplifier envelope, but we don't have one. We just have this line. But if I pick this little white circle up and start dragging it, you start to get some kind of idea that there is an envelope here. It's just that because we had no attack or decay phase set, we weren't seeing it. And so now we've got something that more closely resembles an attack, decay, sustain, and release envelope that we might expect to see. The first line is always the attack phase. The second line is always the decay phase. And the third thinner line is always the release phase. So this point here is where if we hold a key down, this point here is where we hold. And then when I let the key go, we enter the release phase. Let's go back out to the Zoom page and have a look at what our envelope looks like. I am really unhappy with the integration between these two pages. I don't like it at all. And I could spend ages moaning about how badly I think it's been implemented. I'm not. I'm just going to say there are dragons here. Just be aware that this interface isn't the best. If I hover over this little circle and we see 0.524 and hover over this little circle and click with my mouse, we see 0.524. They're very, very clearly not the same value. You have to actually move the circle for it to update, and it's actually this one over here that's wrong. And as soon as I move it anywhere, it turns into 1. It's a bit shonky, this user interface, but like I say, let's put that aside and just deal with what we've got. So why aren't we hearing any release even though we've drawn this big line? I suggest that if you're working with time-based quantities, set your fundamental values here in these sliders. If you want about a second and a half of release, set it with this slider. Then when you go back into the Zoom, you'll see you've got a completely different image now. Here's your 1.5 seconds of release with like really tiny values everywhere else. It's because we haven't set any attack or decay. And so the graphical interface is automatically zooming to give every element of the envelope an equal amount of time. So if you've got tiny, tiny amounts of time on the attack and the decay and you want to make the release bigger, it's really difficult to do it inside the GUI. It can be done, but it's really clunky. So now that we've got a reasonable amount of time, you can see, the number of seconds up here. We can start dragging these things around, and we've just generated a decay phase of about a second. So can you see how it's portioned up that 2 seconds of space that we had in the GUI? It said, well, you've just put that little white circle about halfway, so that's about a second. And they are always equivalent. I'm not saying it's functionally incorrect. I'm saying it's clunky. Right, so here we've got our ADSR envelope and everything's pretty straightforward. But if I double click anywhere inside this image, suddenly things get really complicated because we've introduced a 5th little circle. So what the hell's going on there? If I double click again, I've just introduced another one. And now things are going very badly awry. In fact, I can create an absolutely vast number of individual points. The first one is always the attack phase. The last one is always the release phase. And everything inside is a multi-stage decay. So it now makes your decay part of the envelope much more complex. And in fact, this is now a complex envelope. It doesn't say simple anymore. Can you also see that this little X has appeared? We can click on that X and throw all that stuff away. And we've gone back to a simple ADSR envelope. Now this time, instead of double clicking, well, I'll do it once just to prove it's still there. I'm going to right click and say add. And that's another way to add nodes to your envelope. Right click anywhere, add. Right click anywhere, remove. It removes the point immediately to the left of wherever you click. So it doesn't matter how close I get to this circle. If I'm behind it, that's the point that gets thrown away, the one to the left. Let's add some back in. Now then, I'm just clicking add, but we've got loads of options in this right-click menu. So let's mess around with some of these. Let's create a linear mark. There we go. So let's figure out what we have to do to create a new linear line. First of all, let's click to the left, add. That added a curve. Let's click inside it, add. That created a linear line. And let's click over here, add. It's going to create a new curved line. So it's basically whatever you're hovering over, if you click add, you'll get another one of them. And then you've got your new point to play with. Let's create a spike node. There we go. There's our spike node. Right click inside it, add. Now we've got two spike nodes. So what's this going to do with the envelope? Well, it's going to modulate the volume, the amplitude, exactly this much over this period of time. This is the number of seconds over which the envelope is going to last. So let's hear it. Those two sharp pulses with these spikes. But it doesn't have to be a one-shot deal. I can engage loop mode, and now it's going to play this envelope over and over again. I can sync it to the host BPM. So here we are, we happen to be at 75 BPM at the moment. Increase the BPM. And these two controls are independent, so we don't have to be in loop mode, but we can be in sync mode. So now it'll just play through once, but it'll play through at a rate that's appropriate to the host BPM behind. Let's say I want to make that single curve there slightly longer, 500 milliseconds, it doesn't matter, just an arbitrary amount, but I want to move everything else to the right of it ahead in time to make space for that new 500 milliseconds. The way that I can do that is with one of these functions down the left hand side. I'm going to select lock, and now I'm going to start moving this control, and can you see everything to the right shifts along. Now can you see at the end it kind of went a little bit wrong? I'm going to click auto zoom and it rescales the image. So inherently I'm trying really hard not to be too critical of this GUI because, you know, I don't want to be one of those moaning minis, but it basically kind of gets it wrong, and then you press a kind of a release button and it sorts itself out. So we've now got a new scale over which this map is going to extend. Let's do that again. Make that much longer, and it's just absolutely squashed all of those points together. Click auto zoom. It fixes itself. It's not thrown any data away. It's not broken the envelope. It's just kind of, it doesn't really know what to do with them all. So it just kind of squashes them all up against the wall. In addition to having auto zoom, which is your friend, this says, you know, show me the true representation of what the envelope currently looks like. You can actually manually zoom in and out as well. I just don't like that. I kind of wish that function wasn't there. I just pretty much always use auto zoom. If you really want to hone in on a particular aspect of the envelope, you can kind of zoom into the period of a couple of seconds and then left click on the image and actually drag from left to right. Then you can see it showing you part of the envelope, and then you can kind of focus in and work a little bit more accurately on the bit that you want to see. But I find it really unintuitive, and I don't like the way it kind of clusters everything together on the left hand, on the right hand side like this. I said I wasn't going to whinge, and then I whinged, sorry. Okay, let's turn lock off. XY, what does it do? When it's engaged, the interface will do its best not to move in two planes simultaneously. So if I pick this node up and start dragging right to left, see, it's kind of locking. If I'm just the least bit careful, I can avoid it going up or down at all. You have to be reasonably careful. If I'm absolutely totally careless and drag the mouse down too much, it kind of breaks the glue. It's kind of a sticky sort of thing. So as long as you're in the ballpark of accurate as you're moving left to right, then the control behaves itself. If I let go, yeah, and you have to let go, and click down again and now start dragging up and down, it kind of very quickly comes to realize, oh, that's what you want to do now. And again, you see it just went a little bit left then. You do have to be kind of careful, but as long as you're just reasonably careful with your movement, it does actually stick. Have a play with it. You very quickly figure out how it works. It is pretty good. Fine does exactly that. I can now move big sweeping kind of motions with my mouse, and it just moves the ball more slowly. Scale lets you stretch the entire envelope or compress the entire envelope, but maintaining its relative ratios between each of the nodes. So if I select this node, drag to the right, see everything is stretching, and can you see once again all the stuff to the right is kind of banging up against the wall, but we've not actually lost any data at all. If I now auto zoom, we're now dealing with an 8.5 second envelope, and everything has been stretched appropriately. And finally, for this little cluster of controls over here, snap, there is an almost invisible grid, 16th based grid behind these nodes. And now when I click, can you see it snapping to those points? Turn snap off, and it moves smoothly. Now, just before we finish for today, a quick note about the length of this envelope. It's currently at something like 38, 39 seconds. If we zoom out, let's have a look at what these controls say. 2.7, 3.5, up to like 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. There's about 10 seconds worth of data in these sliders here. And yet we're dealing with a best part of a 40-second envelope. The decay slider is just completely not up to the job for these complex envelopes, because it's obviously dealing with a single node. It can't handle the complexity of this envelope anymore. So just bear in mind that you've disconnected the simplicity of these sliders from the complexity of the envelope underneath. I understand that, you know, they're trying to give you the best of both worlds. Where those worlds collide, it is a little bit kind of unintuitive. So that'll do us for today. We've covered a lot. In the second episode, we're going to deal with everything we've not dealt with today. And I've had to kind of pick what I think are the simplest features to deal with first. Get that under your fingers. Figure out the basic facilities for drawing envelopes. In the next episode, we'll have a look at some of the more complex features, and particularly the idiosyncrasies around the mod envelopes. They do behave differently. Hope you enjoyed the video. If you did, subscribe, hit notifications. You won't miss part 2. Thanks very much. See you then.